All right. In this video, we're gonna briefly talk about the parts of a fraction. The parts of a fraction are the numerator, a fraction bar, and the denominator. The numerator has the base word numer from Latin, numer meaning number, and so our numerator tells how many. In our numerator, we read it as a normal number. And then our fraction bar, we don't read it at all. It's just a fraction bar. It's just letting us know that we have a fraction and that we could use division if it will be useful. And then the bottom part number in our fraction is called the denominator. And the root of denominator is nam. Nam means name in Latin. And so our denominator tells the name of the fraction. The denominator, the name of the fraction, is based on the number of equal-sized parts in each whole. And the denominator, because it tells us the name, we read it as a fraction name. So now let's take a look at this fraction. My numerator is 5, and so I just call it 5. And my denominator is 8, and so I'm going to call this eighths. My fraction is read top to bottom, and so this fraction is 5/8. And so here is a visual representation of 5/8. This rectangle is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 equal-sized parts. And then one of those 8, 2 of the 8, 3 of the 8, 4 of the 8, 5 of the 8 equal-sized parts have been shaded in. Because our denominators are read by their fraction names, let's take a minute and practice reading some fractions. It does not matter what our numerator is. When our denominator is 1, we call them whole. We call that whole or whole units. Does not matter what our numerator is. When the denominator is 2, we call that half or halves. Does not matter what our numerator is. When our denominator is 3, we call those thirds. When our denominator is 4, we might call them fourths, or we might call them quarters. Fourth or quarter, they both mean the same thing. After our first 4 denominators, whole units, half units, thirds, whole unit, halves, third, fourths, or whole, halves, third, quarter. After that, the names of our fractions become pretty regular. We can predict them very well. We say them like they're position numbers. Fifths, sixths, sevenths, eighths, ninths, tenths, 11ths, 12ths. The higher you go, you might encounter some less usual denominators. And so when our denominator is 21, we call those 21st, 31st, 41st, 51st, on and on and on, dot, dot, dot. And if we kept going, we could even get up to 321st. Because the denominator, the name of the fractions, when we see the denominator, we read that by a fraction name. And so I want you to know how to read the fraction names. Then we have 22nds, 33rds, 44ths, 55ths. Which leads me to the idea that my denominator plays an extra special role. My denominator, the name of the fraction, tells how many will make a whole unit. So let's look at our example with eighths again. In order to fill in the entire unit, I would need to shade in 8/8. It takes 8/8 to make one whole. So when I know my denominator, I know how many it takes to make one whole. Listen and repeat. It takes one whole. It takes one whole to make one whole. It takes two halves to make one whole. It takes 3/3 to make one whole. It takes 4/4 to make one whole. You could also say it takes 4/4 to make one whole. I want you to say the whole sentence. How many fifths does it take to make one whole? I want you to answer in a complete sentence. It takes, and then you'll say the answer to make one whole. It sounds like this. It takes 5/5 to make one whole. Say the whole answer about sevenths. Say it out loud. Okay? Say the whole answer about ninths. How many ninths does it take to make one whole? Yes. Now we're going to practice reading some fraction denominators. Only the denominators. I've left the numerators blanks. My denominator is 3, and so I say thirds. My denominator is 5, and so I say fifths. Thirds plus fifths. My denominator is 8, and so the fraction name is eighths. Eighths minus eighths. Fourths plus 14ths. Say it again. Make sure you're reading the cards aloud. Don't read them in your mind. Read them aloud. You don't know the numerator, so you just read the denominator. Say them out loud. Fifths plus fifths. Say them out loud. Fourths are greater than fourths. Our denominator is 12, and so we just say 12th. Be careful, these are 12ths. Try again. Good reading. So when our denominators match, take a look at these. When a set of fractions have the same denominator, they have a denominator in common, we call those common denominators. Common denominators. In the phrase common denominator, common, its meaning is just same. For example, if you and I like the same cartoon, then we have that in common. That is something that is the same between us. And so common denominators are just fractions that have the same fraction name. So we have 17th and 71st. 17th, 71st. Do those have the same fraction name? No. Then we have twelfths and twelfths. Twelfths and twelfths. Do those have the same fraction name? Yes. Then we have fourths and fourteenths. Do they have the same denominator? No. This denominator is 4, and so its fraction name is fourths or quarters, and this fraction has a denominator of 14, and so its fraction name is fourteenths. These are not common denominators. Do not be fooled because the digits are similar. And then we have fourths and fourths, or quarters and quarters. So here we have common denominators. And over here, we do not. These are uncommon denominators. Another term for common denominators is like fractions. When we have like fractions, it just means that they have the same name. Twelfths and twelfths, those are like fractions. They have the same name because they have a common denominator. They have the same name. Quarters and quarters, or fourths and fourths, are like fractions. Now that you know how to read a fraction, the parts of a fraction, and how to find and how to look at and determine if we have a common denominator or like fractions, I'm going to teach you the rule for adding and subtracting and comparing fractions.